honestly, with the Greens, sometimes wonder whether the whole thing being green is just a license to bully. I don't. They can't even go to a ball, and in this case, a charity ball, without making it all about politics. There's something so aggressive about them. The Canberra Press Gallery held its Midwinter Ball in Canberra last night. Very swish, but then came the Greens. The wife of Greens leader Adam Bandt, she had "no coal, no gas" written all over her dress. And Green Senator Sarah Hanson-Young, she had "no gas" plastered over her bottom, which I don't know if that's exactly the right place to paste the "no gas" sign, but still. And Green Senator Liddy Thorpe, she wore an Aboriginal T-shirt outside and shouted "fossil fools" because Woodside and Shell were among the sponsors.
Criminals!
Seriously, I mean, these criminals actually help fuel our cars and warm our homes and let us cook food on the stove, and they earn the billions that we need for our hospitals and police. And I tell you what, without gas and oil, you just need to look overseas and see some countries that are now desperately short of exactly that, and their people are not happy at all. Joining me now is Nationals leader David Littleproud. David, thank you for joining me. I'll get onto the more substantial stuff in a minute, but I can't let this go. You were there, and by the way, your partner looked lovely in that green dress. What did you make of that? All this protesting in your face, kind of, we're too pure for coal and gas, and all that kind of stuff, but we still come along for the free food and the champagne.
Yeah, well, they trashed the intent of what this whole ball's about. It's about raising money for charity, and one of those charities that's close to my heart is rural aid. And that's where most of the money went to last night. And I've in fact reached out to David Crowe, who's the president of the gallery here in Canberra, and expressed my view that it was inappropriate, that effectively I think we've given any currency to this. I think the broader media this morning should not have published any photos whatsoever of these people, and that would have taken away their oxygen, because this is all they are trying to do, is to try to highlight their cause at any expense, whether that be a charity or anything else. But the broader media has a responsibility here to call them out, and call them out not by putting them in the paper, by just ignoring them, by treating them as irrelevant fools and just saying this is inappropriate. And David, to his credit, has said what the whole intent of this ball was: for political adversaries to come together, to lay down their arms, to lay down their messages, to come together for one cause. The cause was charity. And the fact that the Greens couldn't do it, I think, is disgraceful. But I think there's a big lesson here for the media to simply ignore these fools and to not give them the platform that they're looking for, because that's all they're trying to do. This is their business model: to be extreme, to put a big sign up there. As inappropriate it was for Sarah Hanson-Young, I don't think she really thought that one through. But just to ignore them, it shouldn't be in a paper. We should just put them to the side. They're extremities, and I think the gallery should learn from this lesson. That was the message I gave to David Crowe, and to his credit today, they should just ignore them. They shouldn't be in the paper, because you know what? If that happens, no one knows they're there. The only time they know they're there is when we highlight it.
I'm not so keen on the censorship thing. They did it, and I would much prefer mockery. I would much prefer mockery. No censorship, just laugh at them. I mean, it's just, you couldn't invite these people to a kids' party if if you had a piece of coal or something hanging around. I don't know. Look, but to the substantial stuff. I talked before about the Albanese government ministers who've broken, 6 of them now, who've broken Albanese's own ministerial code about owning shares, private shares. And they say, whoops, they're getting rid of them. No one in the public's been hurt by them. So I'm not sure about, whether this hurts anyone really, how big a deal it really is. The Attorney General now saying he'll go away and study if he's in the breach. Maybe he should have done that before. How much should voters really care?
Well, they should. I mean, effectively, Anthony Albanese got elected on the premise that he was going to be above and beyond reproach of anybody in this country. He was going to set a higher standard. Within 100 days, he's failed to do that. His government's failed to do that. And in fact, the first law officer of the land who you would have thought might have run the ruler over the code of conduct and gone through every clause. I mean, he is a QC after all. Might have thought, I'll give this a bit of attention, I'll have a bit of a look and make sure that my financial standing doesn't breach any of that. The fact that he's woken up today after we brought it to his attention that he potentially could be in breach of this and in fact has made decisions that, and we're not saying were made maliciously or in the intent of him making money, but the shares that he held have doubled since decisions he's made as the minister, is something you would have thought that as a first law officer of this land and somebody that's about to put in legislation around an integrity commission might have thought to himself, I might have a quick look at this with all my legal standing that I have in the world. And being a QC, I don't need to get legal advice. I probably can have a look through this and understand this. The fact that he hasn't and the fact that he is now in hiding and won't tell us in a transparent way about what he's done and how he's going to fix this and the decisions that he's made and how that's impacted, nor the Prime Minister, about the other 5 ministers, about their actions, about when they found out, when they told him and the actions after that. And being transparent to the Australian people. Now, they've trashed us for the last 9 years about not being transparent. He said, oh, it's going to be a greater standard. And his only defence is to say, oh, you mob were no good, but you set the standard and he can't even live up to it. You just got to say word hypocrisy just sits there with
I think you've got to it there. I'm not so sure that there's any public interest in the sense of, their interests have been damaged. I think it is about simply nailing them for hypocrisy. And I should underline what you've just mentioned too. I don't think anyone's suggesting that Mark Dreyfus made decisions knowing that his shares of benefit that would go up nearly double in value. I just think, though, that what that does show is the potential for government decisions to actually benefit the ministers making them. And you don't want the perception there or the temptation. I don't think he was tempted. I don't think he even knew. But I'm just saying, it just underlines...
Which is the exact clause, Andrew, you're spot on there, the perception. And that goes to the exact clause of the Code of Conduct in which it's the perception of conflict of interest, and you've just nailed that. And that actually is the exact clause that Mr Dreyfus probably should have had a look at, because that's the position he's put himself and this government in.
Now, one of your MPs, Matt Canavan, has called on the Reserve Bank Governor to resign for being so wrong on interest rates. Before I get onto the really interesting thing he said today, the Governor that is Matt Canavan right now that you've heard the Governor's response?
Oh, look, I think there's a lot of frustration with the Governor of the Reserve Bank, and probably there's a fair bit of credence to why people would have that frustration. But look, he doesn't have long to run. I think it's important that we have some continuity until the end of his contract. But it's important the government's able to articulate their policies and how that'll interact with the RBA policies, the impact that's having on inflationary impacts, particularly not only just for interest rates, but cost of living, either through fuel, either through energy costs, either through food, and making sure that there is a constructive relationship and a continuity plan in terms of how Mr Lowe, Governor Lowe, leaves his position, who takes over. So while I understand the frustration, I think continuity is important until the end of his term.
I think you're right. I think you're right. No, I think you're right. David Littleproud, though, I want to get to something I think a lot of people are missing from his speech. A very important point. The government has said, the Governor, Philip Lowe, today said, mass immigration does not solve our shortage of workers, because then you bring in this case, 195,000 workers a year. They, in turn, need workers to give them houses and transport and health services and teachers for their kids and et cetera, et cetera. So it's a Ponzi scheme. You'll always have to import more because you imported more. So do you think Labor went too far last week in announcing at its Jobs Summit that it's going to increase immigration to an amazing 195,000 people a year?
Well, it's only for this next year. And no, I don't, Andrew, because you've got to understand, during COVID-19, those numbers dropped down. We were averaging around 160,000. And can I just say, from an agricultural perspective...
That's still enormous amount.
107. Well, it is, but when you think about the constraint on the economy, if you want to go out and talk to a business, particularly in regional Australia, or a farmer, and you ask them about the biggest constraint on their business, about them making a quid, it's about having the labour in which to be able to provide that service or to produce that crop. Let me tell you, there are farmers out there at the moment, in fact there are abattoirs at the moment, that are only working at about 50 to 60% capacity because they do not have the labour supply in which to do it. When you've got an unemployment rate with a 3 in front of it, those that can work are working. Those that can't, really, we've got to appreciate, are probably going to be a hindrance on some of those businesses because they do not have the intent to want to work. You've got to appreciate that when people get up in the morning, they have the courage and conviction of their own wallet to actually go and put their money into a business, and they need the support to be able to do it. They need those workers. Otherwise, you know what? If they can't produce that product, they go out of business. And I saw that firsthand where a farmer in Canavan walked away from his farm because he didn't have the confidence that he was going to be able to plant a crop and someone was there to pick it. He was born on that property. And those are the heart-wrenching stories we're seeing not only in agriculture and in small business, but we've got to get the balance right, and we've got to be pragmatic about how we do this. And we've got to make sure we bring these people into areas where...
Yeah, I've got that, but few stay in those areas. That's one thing. Second, we've gone from talking about skilled workers to people who pick fruit. Very important though that is, and I've picked a lot of fruit as a teenager and cut fruit as well. But the point is, maybe we should be looking for ways to improve our culture of work in Australia, rather than importing sort of an underclass to do fairly low-skilled jobs. That's just my view. David Littleproud, I'm actually right out of time, but I did want to ask you very quickly if you could comment on Agriculture Minister Murray Watts now upping the bans on to keep out foot and mouth disease. We now can't import meat products for our personal use. Commercial importers can still do it. For our personal use from 70 countries, including Indonesia and China. Are you pleased with that?
Yeah, it's just that it's 6 weeks too late. We asked for that on the 22nd of July. It was a bit like with the foot mats when we had foot and mouth hit barley. We said there was tens of thousands of people waltzing through the borders without having their feet dipped to protect us from foot and mouth disease. I mean, this guy is inept. He's a good bloke. He's a Gold Coast lawyer. But that doesn't mean you're up to running Australian agriculture or saving you $80 billion if foot and mouth disease hits this country. And that's just the upfront bill. Then you'll pay more at the checkout. So, look, a good bloke, but unfortunately this thing might be a bit of a stretch for him being the agriculture minister. You need someone that understands it, that's going to act decisively. And that is one thing he hasn't done with foot and mouth disease from the start. I hope we can hold this out, but he's not giving me a great deal of confidence.
So far so good. I've got to say, so far so good. But David,
more luck than good management, mate, I'd say.
Well, you don't want to operate on that principle with so much at stake. David Littleproud, thank you so much for your time.